when it comes to the Igbo Jews specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
What were your conclusions and what was your methodology to get to your conclusion?
All right, conclusions and methodology. So I explained earlier, for those who came late, we have to do the anthropology and history first. Jewish law requires us to do investigations first before interpreting the law and then finally applying the law. So in anthropology, we have a methodology, which is ethnography and ethnology, and perhaps even sociology. These are three methods that anyone who studies anthropology will learn. You immerse yourself in the culture, you study it, you observe it, and you take notes and you write about it, what you observed, and you include yourself in it. That's ethnography. Then the ethnology then is the interpretation of what those things mean, the meaning of those things you observed and also participated in. When you do the ethnology, that's where the halakha comes in. You bring all the laws which can apply to the anthropology that you did. And then finally comes the conclusion. The interpretation of the anthropology and the law in the language of the rabbis, because teshubotes, the responsum, are written in rabbinic language for rabbis, not for the lay people. So in the case when it comes to the Igbos, after 8 years of studying, of looking at the anthropology, first I must say that various books that have been written, many books on anthropology of Igbos, history books as well. You can look in the books of Remy Ilona, you can look at the books of Basden, the books of Daniel Lees. You can look at books of Jean Vicente, who's an Haitian anthropologist. You can look at the works of the book called The Forgotten Diaspora, The Making of the Jewish Atlantic. This very important book, published in 2014 by José Horta da Silva and Mark Peter. There are many, there's a lot of scholarship written about the Igbos. What was not done until Obadyah Alliance was interpreting all of that, doing the ethnology, and then the halakha, and putting it together and saying, hey, this is what we have. That's what has not been done. And that's what we did. Now, with that said, a lot of people ask me, why did I go to Nigeria? Did I go to Nigeria to confirm what the ruling that was established a year ago? And I would say, no, I didn't go to confirm that. I went to go see the condition of my brothers, because I'm not the first, nor will I be the last, to acknowledge that the Igbos are brothers of the Jewish people. In the 17th century, the two chief rabbis of London, Raphael Mendola and also Shalomon Tzvi Hirsch, addressed letters to the Igbos, saying, and they begin their letters saying, Ahenu Bnei Israel, our brothers, children of Israel. And so from that time period, we see already how Jews are interacting, or rabbis, I would say, interacting with the Igbos and addressing them as brothers. This should not surprise us, but many people don't know. So I went to Nigeria to see what our brothers are doing, how they are living, what is their condition, what are their needs, what type of what do they have, what do they lack. These were the questions I had. And one of the things I did, I spent a month there, and pretty much every day, I interviewed elders, Igbo elders, and I wanted to acquire what in Igbo language is Omenana or Omenala, what you do in the land. I wanted to record interviews of elders, Igbo elders, not for my sake, not for their sake, but for the sake of people like you who are listening today, to listen to their oral traditions of their practices, and for the people to bring it into the language of the laity. because most people are not going to be knowledgeable enough to read a teshubah in Hebrew, in rabbinic Hebrew. It's quite complex to follow the legal reasoning. But listening to a podcast in English, well, Nigerian English at that, will be much easier, more accessible to people listening. And so that's what I did. I went to 4 cities. I started in Abuja, then Lagos, and then Owerri. And I visited various congregations of Igbos who have been Judaized. And I'll explain what that means. In Igbo history, the Igbo tradition is an entirely oral tradition. Meaning that they didn't transmit their Torah by way of writing in a book like Jews did. They transmitted it orally. And one of the things that really amazed me was to what extent the oral tradition was transmitted and kept among Igbo. And I will say this: one of the things that most surprised me was to see Igbos practicing, no matter if they are practicing Judaism or connected to Judaism or not, they will circumcise all the boys on the 8th day. They will marry among themselves. They don't marry outside. And they have to perform marriage according to their marriage ritual, which parallels with Jewish Israelite marriage rituals. And they practice some things that we read in the Torah every year in Bereshit and Shemot, but we don't practice in our Jewish communities to this day. And that's because of diaspora. Every time the Jewish people have suffered some type of persecution or political turmoil, they have had to move from one country to the next. And every time we move from one place to the next, we lose a bit of our soul. We lose a little bit more of our tradition. But the Igbos have been for millennia, if not many centuries, in one particular region peacefully. They were able to preserve their oral tradition without problems until about 150 years ago. That's when the Christianity came in to this country, to this region of Igbo land. And that's what's going on here, is forced conversions to Christianity. The Anglican Church, the British came in and brought the Anglican Church and told the parents, we will educate your children for free. Yeah, they educated them in the church and in Christianity. They learned to read and write, but they estranged them from the Torah. And so what happened was, as that second generation of children, they were estranged from the oral traditions of the Igbos and created a problem within the family, such that the children were raised thinking that everything they learn or do in the land in the form of Omenana or Omenala is considered or is rendered to be paganism. So now, as Christians, with this theology, they want to go as far away as possible from those traditions. And that's the context of the responsum that the Obadyah Alliance ruled on. Not to say that they are Jews or not Jews, but to say those who have been estranged, how are they to come back? And there's something that's very different on this ruling from many other rulings. The ruling doesn't say that a Jewish court should receive or should determine that the Jewish court should determine whether Igbos are Jews or not, or apt to return into a community. And rather, they should go to the Igbo communities and perform the Kolonan ceremony, because they have their own procedure to return and receive those who have been estranged from Omenala. They have their own procedure. And I don't believe that the Jewish community, first of all, most rabbis don't know anything about Igbos. So that renders them, that disqualifies them from even making any type of ruling. The Igbos know themselves, their chiefs, tribal leaders, they know exactly who is who. I remember when when I went to the first community in Abuja, people were looking at me funny because they said, "You look like us, kind of, but are you Igbo? Are you from us? Who are you? Where are you from?" In one of the communities I visited in Lagos, one of the gentlemen said to me, "Rabbi, we have heard everything you have said to us, but you know who we are, but who are you?" I had to give him my genealogy. And after I gave him 6 generations on both sides of my my tree, he was satisfied. He was satisfied. And so I'm just telling you how they function. So most Jews will not be able to pass that test within this community because the Igbos are connected to the land. They are connected to their ancestral land. Wherever Igbos pass away, they must be buried in the land of their ancestor. So they know who they are. They can trace many generations back because they have they have lands which are passed down from generation to generation within that same family, in the same way we see in the Torah, the law of inheritance, Nahalah. And Jewish communities don't practice this today, but they practice that still to this day because they are in their land. They have their land. And Jews have been displaced from country to country, land to land for many generations. And these types of practices that have to do with the land have become theoretical for us to this day. But for them, it's something they live on a daily basis. On a daily basis.
So from an anthropological standpoint, what was one of the most shocking or inspiring parts of your trip over to Nigeria?
Oof, there's a long list. And I started to write down some of my thoughts because if not, we're not finished. I will never end this interview. There are a lot of things. I want to share with everyone that I kind of posted, I made a funny post on my Facebook account after my first Shabbat experience in Abuja. And I said to my fellow Jews, if you have not worshipped with Igbos before, you have not been worshiping properly. That's what I said. And people were like, what are you talking about? What is this? What's going on? And what I want to say with that is that I cried with tears of joy at this synagogue, the first synagogue I went to. When I stepped in and I sat down, grabbed my talet and my beracha, and grabbed my sidur, and then the prayers, everything was in Hebrew. So that was my first shock. I said, wow, everything is in Hebrew here. Okay, that's nice. And perfect pronunciation, very clear and crisp pronunciation. And then the whole service, I was called up to read the Torah, the first reading in the place of Kohen, because they didn't have a Kohen. And then after the Torah service, then as they return the Torah to the ark, most congregations are singing and chanting Mizmor LeDavid, Psalm 29. They have a special melody in Igbo language that they sing. And I never in my life, I had never experienced something so powerful and meaningful within a Jewish space ever. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm 42 years old. I've been to a lot of Jewish communities around the world. And I've never, ever experienced such atmosphere in any Jewish congregation in the world. That was my introduction into Igbo Jewish practice. Then when I went to Lagos, similar experience, joy, hospitality, and the Alenu. If you haven't experienced Alenu, which is the last prayer, the last declaration of the prayer service, with the Igbos, you have not been praying it properly. They know how to do it. And wow. It's from the beginning to the end, it is joyful. It's filled with kavanah. And we know what that is. The halakha says we must pray with intent. It cannot be done in a mechanic way. Many times I will go into a synagogue and people are just mumbling the lips, just trying to get through the book, get through the prayers, and then they're done and just leave. Sometimes they're mumbling and not even looking into what they're saying. It's done by rote. But the Igbo congregations, you won't see that. Everybody is involved. There's call response going on. There's call response going on the entire time, and just beautiful melodies between Hebrew, English, and Igbo language. Something that I experienced in Obadyah when I went to Igbo land was something that I had never experienced in any Jewish congregation either. Many Jews don't know what bakashot are. Bakashot, if you open like an old Sephardic prayer book, bakashot are those supplicatory prayers or songs like hymns, which are said before the morning prayers. So it's a way of you entering into a mode of meditative modes and opening your heart to then begin the actual study, the korbanot and the pezuket zimra, and then the amidah. In Obadyah, they begin every morning their prayers with 40 minutes to an hour of bakashot, of just praising and singing in English, in Hebrew, and Igbo language. And on the days that are not Shabbat and Yom Tov, they use traditional instruments, percussive instruments, to enhance the service. And I was able to experience that with them on Rosh Chodesh Ab, which was just a few weeks ago. And it was awesome. It was an awesome experience. And I just kept thinking to myself, why can't all Jews experience something like this? And I'm sure once you experience that, you can't go back. You can't go back to what you've been doing before. There's no way. That's why I like what you said, Rabbi. It's a life-changing experience. It has been a life-changing experience for me. Definitely. For sure. The food is very hot and spicy, but it's fresh and tasty. The weather is very hot. There's sunshine every day. Some rain here or there in the summer, in the July, but it's very hot. They're very close to the equator. And that's actually a benefit for prayers, because like here in Europe where I live, Shabbat can end at 11 p.m. at night. But in somewhere close to the equator, it's the same the whole year, between 6 and 7 p.m. the whole year. And that's more in line with what the halakha establishes for prayer. You know, when you have these long solar hours, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Let's see what else. Yeah, it spoke about how hospitable they are, and the singing and the music, and I had many tears of joy. Many tears of joy.
Yeah. So I mean, this is like we're all a part of the journey now that you've established in these things. Now, in terms of like tefillah, prayers, these types of things, were these things that just organically happen over time?
Good question. So it's different in all the congregations I visited. Most have learned. They have learned either online with what we have through YouTube or other pages that record the liturgy. They have taught themselves. They have acquired books by rabbis who have visited either from Israel, Cameroon, or from the United States. Whatever literature they have in their hands has come to them from the outside. And they have learned, and they have been guided either in Ashkenazi tradition, some of them in Sephardic tradition, I would say more Yerushalmi, some even Moroccan, which makes more sense because genetically speaking, a lot of Igbos descend from, have connections with Moroccans. And that's where this red cap comes from. This red fez comes from. That was explained. It comes from there. That's why the Igbos use the red. So you will not find a uniform Igbo Jewish prayer or liturgy. That doesn't exist, and that's something that perhaps we can help them to create. But it has to stay indigenous. It cannot be a colonial invasion, like either creating something Ashkenazi or Sephardi for Igbos. They have to be able to create, and I think they're on the right track. They're on the right track. They just need some guidance. And what's going to happen, let me tell you, is that every day, more and more Igbos are leaving Christianity and coming to the Torah. Wow. They're coming to the Torah. And so there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of space for us to help, but we cannot encroach on their traditions. For me, it felt like I went there to observe, and in sometimes I was teaching, and other times I was learning. So it was an interesting experience for me, because as I learned Omenana, and I'm teaching Sephardic minhagim and tradition, and legal tradition, everybody's learning and teaching at the same time. It was awesome. It was an awesome experience.
So maybe you could go more into it. I mean, I've had conversations with Remy alone and other people. Can we learn more about? Hopefully, I'm thinking about Omenana, because it sounds like Amuna.
Sounds like Amuna. Yeah. Omenala means what you do in the land. There are different dialects of the language. Some people say Omenana, others say Omena Allah. So Allah means the land. So what you do in the land. And the reason why the land is so important is because, as we read in the Torah, we just read it last week in Parashah Ekeb. I give you these mishpatim. I'm giving you these civil laws which you shall do in the land. So the name we call Judaism in Hebrew, we call it Mesorah, the transmission. They call it Omenala or Omenana, which means what you do in the land. And you cannot separate Igbos from that land. You cannot separate Igbos from the land, because everything that they do depends on that land. There's a concept in Igbo culture called Aru. And Aru refers to, in Hebrew, what we call To'eba, which are abominations. Any type of Aru that is committed in Igbo land impurifies the land. We've seen that in the Torah. The Torah says, if you don't keep these mitzvot, the land will spit you out. It will vomit you out. They have the same exact concept in Omenana. And that's why when certain things happen within Igbo land, they have to go through a ritual purification with their priestly clan, the Enri clan, to perform certain rituals. And if people don't want to do teshuvah and continue in their wayward path, then they will be considered outcasts. No one will marry those people. And everybody knows who the outcasts, because they're labeled as Osu, which are outcasts. No one will marry those lineages. That's something very important that I will mention later as we get into the question about slavery and slave trade. Because yes, we have the Igbos and their traditions, but in their communities, they know who are the outcasts, and they don't marry those families. In the same way, in Jewish law, we don't marry the mamzerim. We don't marry those lineages. So they have the same exact concepts.
Well, and so no, I know that the law of the land, Omenana, saying it in my dialect, would that be like considered like a nusak? Was it a hashkafa? Is it like I know it's the law, but like how would we categorize it to understand? And is it something
It's
that
everything. It encompasses everything. It encompasses what we will call halacha, hashkafa, minhagim, everything. All of that. All of that.
and is that a byproduct of it's two ideas with it. One, you talked about the Judification,
Yes.
right, of the Igbo. So I want to touch on that. But Omenana, this idea is this kind of like their Shulchan Aruch, their Masur that came from Israel directly. Like
Yes, I will call it is their Mishnah.
Okay, their Mishnah. Okay,
Is their Mishnah. Is their Mishnah, and also I will say is their Talmud, because the Talmud has halacha and it has Haggadah and also Midrash. So in this case, with them, because it's not a written tradition, they don't have Midrashim, but they have Aggadot. They have many stories, and those stories teach the wisdom, the morality, in the same way that Haggadah does in the Talmud for the Jewish tradition. And then you have all the Mishnayot, all the laws. All these laws in the Omenana is transmitted orally, because they are living it on a daily basis, what they do in the land. It's alive for them. It's not written. It's something they do daily, from the moment they wake up until they go to sleep.
You know, one of the things about the Beta Israel in the east of Africa, when they went out there, the idea was to say that, okay, well, they had their system was revolved around like kind of like wise men, like they called them quiches or something like this. The wise men of they were the Kes, yeah, they were the ones who were the Rabbi Kish is there, so I just saw his name. But the transmission of that wisdom came through those elders. Is that the same structure that you see in Nigeria?
Yes, and I saw something that I loved very much when I went to the first congregation I visited in Abuja. After the entire Torah service in the Jewish way, as you know, the way all Jews are doing it every Shabbat, then they go to another room in the synagogue building. They go to another room, and all the elders are sitting at the table, and the youth are across from them. And then they do Omenana. They transmit all the oral teachings, what they have received from their elders. They transmit then to the next generation in a session that can last hours of transmission. So they are doing this every Shabbat. First, the Jewish rituals, and then Omenana. So that way they are preserving this way of transmitting from one generation to the next. I thought that was beautiful, because in many Jewish congregations, you don't see this type of transmission. Maybe within the Syrian Jewish community, there's this type of transmission speaking about the old country, which is Syria. Some people will speak in Arabic, and the elders are speaking in Arabic and talking about stories and lore coming from Syria and how it came into the local community, whether it's in Mexico, Argentina, or New York. You will see that in that kind of community. But many Jewish communities don't have that anymore. People are transmitting from books, not from their own experience or from what they heard from their grandparents. It's very different. And I thought that was, for me, that's one of the most powerful things that Igbo Jews are doing to this day. So in other words, even though they are assuming Jewish practices that all Jews are doing around the world, they're not forgetting who they are as Igbos. And I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. And it's needed, and some people criticize the Ethiopian expansion here in Israel and say that, because they left a lot of their traditions and assumed, say, Ashkenaz or Sephardic ways, that next generation that came after them just kind of left a lot of the religion and assimilated into just mainstream secular Israeli culture.
That's correct. And that's something that Igbo Jews, we can learn from Igbo Jews. They are living this experience every day. Igbos every morning they will partake of the kola nut ceremony. That is one of the most important rituals that are practiced on a daily basis.
So what are the issues? I'm just keep bouncing back with Beta Israel being, very accepted Jewish community in Africa. One of the issues over there was the process of marriage, right? In that dynamic. So like most of what we understand through marriage, we get out of the Masechet Kedushin and the first parak, these things, Kesef Starbia, and then we have Gittin, which is another Masechet that deals with the different variations around divorce. So them not necessarily having those Mishnayot per se, they do now, but just historically they had their own, Omenana in various ways. The question is how do they deal with those particular issues? Because in Ethiopia, it's kind of a balagan in certain areas.
Okay. So among the Igbo, it's very organized and it's very globalized or universalized. In all of the communities I visited, I asked those questions and everyone gave me the same exact answers. So I was, and I recorded this in the podcast that I uploaded on my SoundCloud, and I shared it on my Facebook pages for everyone to listen to them on a daily basis as I recorded them. Marriage takes place with four stages. So when someone's going to get married, they have to, meet the parents, the families meet. There's an exchange of like a bride price. So this is in Jewish law, it's called kinyan. You can have a marriage without kinyan because of the language of the Torah. So they have kinyan in this sense. What they don't have is a written ketubah. But we know in Jewish law, the ketubah was instituted by Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach during the Greek period. So that's much later. So what they have in Omenana is something that's before this. So that's one of the indications for me that this community broke off from the rest of Israelites before that time period because of the way they do things. In terms of divorce, there's virtually no divorce among Igbos. But when there are divorces, it's a communal thing. They have to come before the elders, before the families, and they try to convince them not to. And in some cases, some people are going to laugh. In some cases, a man will take another wife. And when he takes a second wife, the first wife will stop acting up. So there were a lot of stories about that. Among the men. They were laughing a lot about it.
Wait.
I have it recorded as well on one of the podcasts. So
when part of the ways to fix marital issues was through polygamy, in essence.
Yes. Because then, according to what I was explaining, was that the first wife, if she was acting up, then she now enters into competition. So now she has to behave if she wants to keep that husband. So she has to behave, and that's something that they practice in their communities. So
it works for them. It works
for them. That's the culture.
The culture. And okay, so just to move the conversation into I brought Remy's name up before.
Yes.
He's written a lot of books about it. He's an expert on this area. God willing, we'll be able to have a conversation with him as well about this.
All right.
This humongous happening. Now, one of the things is that there's many historians that talk about. There's a famous African king. His name Muhammad Bello. Have you heard about?
Yes.
And he writes in his memoirs that the Africans, he says, he's like defending the Africans, or he says, us Africans, we're not savages. We didn't sell our brothers into slavery. Rather, we sold the Canaanites. He referred to them as Canaanites, who've been living in our land for over a millennium. So that, as a point, many discussions around this topic, one of the most biggest and you say juiciest concepts is this idea that many Igbos were sold in the transatlantic slave trade. Now, some historians say that there's 1.7 out of 1.7, there was 1.2, 1.3, some say less. There's different, because she says she told around the whole conversation. What did you get from the ground from the people there?
Good question. So I spoke to some people who are descended from what they call Aru, the Aru men. And they explained to me that most of those slaves who were sold were from the Aru people, which is a group among the Igbos. The second thing they said to me was that in the first generation, they were trading, just doing different types of trade with the Europeans, and then they were duped. They were taken as slaves by the Europeans, and then this system was developed where the Aru were the ones doing the slave trading with the Europeans, the Aru, among the Igbos. And so the reason why there's a lot of controversy around this is because everyone speaks about the Aru being responsible for the slave trades. But if you are from that group, you don't want to acknowledge the fault of your ancestors. So that's why there's this debate. Some are saying yes, and others are saying, no, it's not that, it's not this, because there's this pushback. It's the blame. No one wants to take the blame. I was just speaking today. I speak on a daily basis with Omenana defenders. We have a group for many years now, and we were talking about this very same issue today, this afternoon, before this interview, and how this one particular group of Igbo say the Aru need to ask for forgiveness for what they did by selling off so many slaves. I'm not going to get into that debate. I'm just transmitting the information that I received. Yeah.
So on that point, in North America, going off of how halakhic rulings and decisions come about, over 100+ years in America, there has been, Blacks, African Americans, Negroes, whatever term you want to use, that have said, hey, our tradition is that we're part of these lost tribes. They develop when they're able to have religious freedoms, because there was a time where Blacks were not allowed to have religious freedoms. When they were able to, that's the first thing that they went to, right? And over 100+ years, there's been Hebrew Israelites. We have a new radical expression of that today. Yes. That kind of like messes up the history, but the history has always been African Americans wanting Rabbi Matthews, Rabbi Levy, Rabbi Ford. Their goal was always to try to integrate. It was rejected a lot, but which I believe led to this radical expression that we have today. What would we say to African Americans who identify or connect to this idea of the lost tribes based off of what we know today about the Igbos being sold into North America?
Wow. I asked this very same question to the chiefs in Owerri, in Igbo land. And the answer I got was this. The answer was, they said that they know how to identify Igbos no matter how many generations or where they have gone, because of the practices they had. So I love the answer, because that's the same exact answer we get in our Mishnah, in our Gemara, which is modus operandi. What you do, what you observe someone is doing, that is the testimony of that person's Israelite status. So I was told that if someone claims to be Igbo or descendant of Igbo, we check to see what in their family, what customs do they have. If they have Igbo customs, they are Igbo. And then that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how do we reintegrate them? Or what shall we do? How do we help them? And in Owerri, in Igbo land, they told me that there have been people from Cuba and the USA who have done just that. They have come and integrated with them and have returns and have acquired their Igbo Jewish status in such a way. So they are prepared. I am now speaking for this community, and they are prepared to receive as many people as possible. Whoever wants to go and go through this experience of returning to your ancestor, to your roots, your cultural root, welcome.
Okay, and so on that point, that's very, very important information that they're welcoming us. So another question is, the people who came to North America were under the context of distress, right? And for generations they were forbidden to practice any other type of spirituality other than, what they received on plantations in many cases.
Right.
A lot of it was Christianity.
Right.
So how would they, from a halakhic standpoint, be classified dealing with that? But it's like if someone was captured by the Romans or captured by a Spanish army and they were denied, they said, hey, if you do any of this, boom, we're going to kill you. And then two, 3 generations, it's like, hey, we know we have an oral tradition that we have this connection, but in terms of practice, we really don't, we weren't allowed to keep anything based off of distress.
Yes, this is a very difficult question to answer. And I believe it's difficult to establish a blanket statement for all cases. I believe it has to be studied case by case. Because I know some African Americans who can trace back to the colony of Virginia, and in the colony of Virginia, almost 90% of the slaves that came in there were from the Igbo.
Yeah.
So if someone is able to trace by genealogy to those slaves that came in, and also trace that they were marrying Igbo among Igbos, because that's another thing. Igbos don't marry outside of their culture. We see it in the Caribbean islands, in Haiti, for example. The slaves there who were from the Igbo didn't want to mix with the other African slaves. They didn't mix because they were not circumcised. That's according to historical documentation in that context. But in the context of the United States, we have to, before we can even tackle the halachic ramifications of this, I believe we need to do the anthropology and the history first. I haven't done that. I'm not an expert in that. So we learn from our teachers to say, when you don't know something, say you don't know. So I'm not an expert when it comes to what's happening in the United States. I know the Caribbean very well. I know those sources because I've studied them for my PhD and my master's, and in what's happening in Brazil as well, and in Suriname and these places. For example, there were cases where Jews, Portuguese Jews, bought slaves, and they were circumcised. They saw they were circumcised, and they wrote letters back to the rabbis in Amsterdam, and they said, "How should we treat them? They came from the Igbos," and they said, "Free them. They are our brothers." We have those documents of the correspondences through the Sheilot, the shoot literature or the responsive literature. But this is what's happening in Brazil and in Suriname, South America, 17th, 18th century. But I haven't seen anything like that within the USA context. So we need to study everything that's available to us to reconstruct the context by region. I believe by region in the USA on the East Coast. And then from there, in each region, then start to apply the halakha. What you said about the duress, that could be a very good indicator or a principle in order to establish Jewishness of someone who descends from slavery and slave trade, because they're considered to be tinok shenishba, a child who's been sequestered by the goyim, raised in their traditions. And according to halakha, that person is still an Israelite. The question is, after so many generations and mixing with non-Israelite people, then how do we determine can we establish a majority, a hazakah based on the majority? Possibly, but in order to do that, we need to do the anthropology first. I haven't done that.
So that definitely needs to be something should be funding for to research that. Now, when we talk about the dynamic of, say, African Americans, say, going to Igbo land,
yes,
in saying, proclaiming and saying, hey, you know what, I can't prove it on paper because we were, under stress, and our history was removed and systematically removed. And it makes you wonder, like, why did they care so much to remove the history of these people, right? So the history was systematically removed from these people. So, but we've had traditions of Judaism, and the only thing we could attach ourselves to was what we had around us, which was mainstream Judaism. Is, do the people in Nigeria, the Igbos, do they have a reacclimation process? Have they got to that stage, or they just mostly been so enclosed into?
They are at the stage. They are at the stage, and that's why I'm reporting, and I'm telling you, welcome. Those that want to connect in such a way will be welcomed by brothers in Igbo land.
Now, would it be like a Ger Sahumra type of a thing, or would it just be like learning the Omenana, and you know what I mean? Like, how did they?
Yes, and partaking of the Kolana ceremony. First thing I would say, if that man is not circumcised, he needs to do that first, because it is considered aru. It is an abomination for Igbo not to be circumcised. So that's the first thing they will have to do. So it follows the same structure of the Torah. That's the first thing you have to do, even before you can even sit down at the table to talk about this.
There's a rabbi who I've spoken to a few times in this chat, and he put a couple of questions. I wanted to see if he wanted to. Rabbi, do you want to come up? I can see you. You want to ask your questions, or you're okay with that? Hold on. Okay. Trying to unmute you. Okay. Rabbi, you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Okay. So first I want to say Koach Kavod, both of you, and thank you for this opportunity to express and explain not only your experiences, but your knowledge, information about this great, I call this one of the last and greatest chapters in the diaspora. So Baruch Hashem for what you're doing. And you too, Rav Mordechai, much kavod to you. For both of you, have nothing but I feel starstruck right here. Okay, you two guys like my celebrity rabbis. I do have a question, because the phenomenon here in the U.S. with African Americans being forced to breed and forced to, and you already addressed that. I think you said that they're waiting with open arms. And me personally, coming through the traditions and Masorah from Rabbi Matthew, but more from the halakhic aspect of it, and knowing what he envisioned. So with that being said, a lot of people who are here in America, who have their own oral traditions, identify as Jews, may not want to join the old way with the Nigerians, although they consider them their brothers. What do you see in the future with that group of African Americans? And I already started an organization called West African Jews of the Diaspora, because we all been scattered throughout the world, and not just here in the US today, also in Brazil and other parts of South America. So what do you foresee based on your experiences, based on what you're working with? I'm right now personally working with teaching and hoping to cultivate future leaders under the situation that we are in. I am looking forward to the future. Based on what you're telling me, it looks like a beautiful thing that's happening, Be'ezra Hashem. But what do you see? And I'm looking forward to hear your thoughts, both of you, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your question and bringing this issue. I have had this conversation before, I think sometime last year, with some people who are part of some type of Hebraic movement among African Americans in the United States. And I will repeat what I told them. Form your own communities. Form your own communities. Create your own indigenous tradition, which brings Africa and also United States and maybe the Caribbean, and create your own tradition in a halachic way and express it in that way, make it your own. Because I believe you are correct. Not everyone wants to go back to the old way and connect with the Igbos. And every community, every Jewish community that we mentioned today has its own identity based on geography and experience. And even some communities like the Sephardic community that was expelled from Spain and Portugal and went to the Ottoman Empire and to other places in the New World are always remembering Sepharad, Spain, Portugal, always through the language, the food, the music, the way we study the law. And I believe that African American Jews can do the same exact thing in the USA. Same exact thing. Connect to the old land, express it in the language of the new lands, and stay with halakha. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and we could, and I think it's about building off of Nigeria, building off of things like Omenana, building off of these mechanisms, and clarifying that Rabbi Huda, he actually has a Siddur. I haven't saw it yet, but it's the West African Siddur.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. So these types of tools, I think it's pertinent, because I mean the issues like this, there's people, there's millions of dollars that have been put into people going to India to research B'nai Menashe and other, tribes, and they have some chazaka, something, it's open, but it's there, and they love the Torah, and they're good people, and I met many here in Israel, right? You see a lot of B'nai Menashe all over the place, and the same thing with other communities, with Spanish communities, these types of things, in terms of those. So it seems like that there should be a safe space of development for African Americans who connect to the Nigerian outlook, the West African outlook, and there should be a segue system into them to be able to keep halakhic Judaism. And
I want to add something.
Go ahead, Rabbi, please.
I want to add something very important to what you're saying. What we cannot have is people coming to Torah and being disenfranchised by another group of Jews. We cannot have that. And that's why I started explaining about Hazakah, and all Jews are Jews today because of Hazakah. If one Jew starts saying to another Jew, you're not Jewish or you're doubtful, that person is bringing doubt on himself and his whole lineage, because we are all Jews based on the same exact legal principles. So what you're saying about creating a safe space is so important. You know how many people are alienated from the Torah because they approach a local synagogue and the rabbis look at them and say, who are you? No, we don't want you. They won't tell them in that way, but they will make them feel unwanted. And so that person ends up going to Islam. Or to some other denomination. In the United States, we have so many denominations of religions, and people are creating their own religions. So that's what's happening in the United States. We cannot have that. I believe now, today, we have the tools to be able to rebuild all those Jews that have been disenfranchised. That's my vision.
Yeah, and exactly. That's the point. Is that we're here, and it's also prophetic. You know what I mean? We have an idea that towards the end of days that people will be gathered, people who were exiles, people who were subjugated will return. And it's not. It doesn't have to be necessarily, a criticism to the overall Jewish community, but it could be a criticism on us as Black Jews or Jews of color that we're not establishing that, and we're not going out and we're not building those safe spaces ourselves, but rather throwing people who are culturally different in the diaspora, right? Because we're not in Eretz Israel. We're not with the Beis Hamikdash where everything's clear, right? We don't have a Sanhedrin. So when we talk about other communities taking on, it's hard for communities of Sephardic and Ashkenaz, you know what I mean, to deal with each other and these types of things. So I think it's incumbent upon us to do this. And I think the trip that you just had to Nigeria really opens up that connection between African-American spiritual healing and the expansion and understanding of the traditions that have been developed in Africa, that the Igbos really feel that this connection goes all the way back to the time of the temple, Omenana and these different things. So, authenticity, these things, it's there, right? But it's not about everyone having to agree with it. It's just more so saying like we're saying that. So I think we should have more conversations about this. I think if there's anyone else that has any specific questions.